The train's whistle cut through the October cold like a knife through butter, but Claire Matheson barely heard it. She stood on the wooden platform at Cedar Ridge Station, her single carpetbag at her feet, watching the black smoke dissolve into the gray sky. The conductor had already pulled away, leaving her with nothing but dust and the weight of her family's rejection pressing down on her shoulders. No one had come to meet her. She pulled her wool shawl tighter, though it did little against the wind that swept down from the mountains. The letter in her pocket, the one from her sister, had promised someone would be here. A respectable arrangement, Martha had written, better than staying here where everyone knows. Where everyone knew she was barren, where everyone whispered about the fever that had taken more than just her health 2 winters ago. The platform was empty, save for a few crates and a mangy dog that sniffed at her boots before wandering off. Claire picked up her bag, its leather handles worn smooth from her mother's hands before they'd become hers. Inside was everything she owned: 2 dresses, a nightgown, her grandmother's Bible, and a small pouch of coins that wouldn't last a week. She started toward the cluster of buildings that made up the town, if it could even be called that. A general store, a saloon with its doors already swinging despite the early hour, and what might have been a boarding house, though its crooked sign was too faded to read. That's when she saw him. He came around the corner of the stable, leading an Appaloosa mare with one hand while the other balanced a saddle over his shoulder. Not a fancy saddle, the leather was worn dark with use, but it gleamed with care. He moved with the easy rhythm of a man who'd spent more time with horses than people, his boots raising small clouds of dust with each step. He wasn't young, maybe 35 to her 24, but he wasn't old either. Just weathered, like everything else in this place. His hat shadowed his face, but she could see the line of his jaw, clean-shaven unlike most of the men she'd passed on her journey west. When he looked up and saw her standing there, he didn't quicken his pace or slow it. He just kept coming, steady as a river current. He stopped about 10 feet away, setting the saddle on the fence rail with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his calloused hands. The mare nickered softly, and he ran a palm along her neck without looking away from Claire. "Miss Matheson." His voice was low, roughened by wind and weather, but not unkind. Claire straightened her spine, a habit from years of her mother's training. "Yes, I'm waiting for—" She paused, realizing she didn't even know the name of whoever was supposed to collect her like a parcel. "Someone was meant to meet me." They didn't come. It wasn't a question. He said it the way he might comment on the weather, a simple fact. Nothing more, but something in his tone made her throat tight. "I see." She lifted her chin, though she felt about as substantial as the smoke still lingering in the air. "Well, I suppose I'll need to find lodging until—" "Got a blanket here." He reached behind the saddle and pulled out a thick wool blanket, the kind that could turn away rain and cold both. It was rolled tight and secured with leather strips. "Nights are getting cold." He set it on the fence beside the saddle, then stepped back, not presenting it to her, just leaving it there, like he'd forgotten it. Claire stared at the items: a saddle, a blanket, the practical gifts of a practical man, but gifts nonetheless. From a stranger. "I don't understand." "Sky's looking like snow," he said, glancing up at the heavy clouds. "Early this year." "Sir, She stopped, frustrated by his refusal to acknowledge what was happening. "I can't accept these. I don't even know your name." "Colt Wheeler." He touched the brim of his hat, not tipping it exactly, just acknowledging her. "Got a ranch about 3 miles north. Nothing fancy. Barn's warm, though. Got a room fixed up in the back." The implication hung between them like washing on a line. Her sister's letter suddenly made sense. A respectable arrangement. Better than staying where everyone knows. "My family sent word." Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "They did. And you're—" She couldn't say it, couldn't form the words that would make this real, that would confirm she'd been bartered away like livestock. "I'm offering you somewhere to stay." He looked at her directly for the first time, and she was surprised to find his eyes were gray. like the sky before a storm. Not cold, though, just steady. That's all. You're not beholden to anything. But they said, I know what they said. His jaw tightened slightly, the first sign of any emotion beyond that terrible calm. They said a lot of things. Doesn't matter much what they said, though only matters what you decide. Claire's fingers found the letter in her pocket, its edges soft from handling during the long journey. And if I decide to get back on the next train, he shrugged, a small movement that somehow encompassed the whole of the frontier's indifference. Track washed out about 20 miles east. Won't be another train for a week, maybe 2. Of course, even escape was denied her. I have money for lodging, she said, though the weight of the coin pouch made a liar of her. Mrs. Garrison runs the boarding house. She's also the minister's wife. He paused, letting that sink in. A minister's wife would ask questions, would want to know why a young woman was traveling alone, would likely have already heard whatever story her family had spread ahead of her. She's particular about her guests. The mare stamped her foot, impatient with standing still. Colt murmured something low and soothing, his hand never leaving her neck. The gentleness in that touch, that was what decided her, though she couldn't have said why. Just somewhere to stay, she repeated. Just that. And you're not expecting... The words died in her throat. Ladies didn't speak of such things, even when they were no longer ladies in anyone's eyes. I'm expecting you'll need time to figure things out, he said. Ranch work's hard. Could use an extra pair of hands if you're willing. Can't pay much. But there's food and that room. Work. Not what her family had arranged, surely. What kind of work? Cooking. Mending. Maybe help with the chickens if you've a mind to. Martha, that's my cook. Her arthritis is getting worse. She's been talking about heading to California to live with her daughter. Ordinary work. Respectable work. The kind she'd done at home before. Before? Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. Why would you offer this? He was quiet for a long moment, looking past her at something she couldn't see. Maybe the mountains. Maybe nothing at all. Because the sky's looking like snow, he said finally. And you're standing here with one bag and nowhere to go. That wasn't an answer. Not really. But Claire was beginning to understand that out here, in this place where the horizon stretched endless and unforgiving. Maybe the simple truths were the only ones that mattered. It was cold. She had nowhere else to go. He had a warm place and work that needed doing. She looked at the saddle on the fence, its leather dark with care and use, at the blanket beside it, at the man who'd brought them but wouldn't hand them to her directly. All right, she said, and was surprised to find her voice steady. I'll come. He nodded once, then picked up the saddle and slung it over his shoulder again. He left the blanket on the fence. Wagons around back, he said, already walking. We'll want to get moving before the weather turns. Claire picked up her carpet bag and, after a moment's hesitation, the blanket too. It was heavier than it looked, the wool dense and tightly woven. It smelled of wood smoke and leather and something else sage. Maybe. She followed him around the stable to where a wagon waited, sturdy and unremarkable like everything else. He set the saddle in the back, then held out his hand for her bag, not to help her up, just for the bag. She handed it over and climbed up herself, her traveling dress catching on the rough boards. He swung up onto the seat beside her, gathering the reins with the same easy competence he'd shown with everything else. The horses, a matched pair of bays, started forward at his quiet word. They rode in silence through the town, past the saloon where laughter already spilled into the street, past the general store where a woman swept the porch and watched them with sharp eyes. Claire kept her gaze forward, her hands folded in her lap, the blanket across her knees. At the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open land, Colt spoke again. That saddle, he said, not looking at her. It's good leather, well balanced. When you're ready to learn to ride, it'll serve you well. When, not if. Claire touched the blanket, feeling the tight weave beneath her fingers. "And if I'm never ready?" He glanced at her then, just briefly, and she caught something in his expression that might have been understanding, or patience, or simply the recognition of one damaged creature by another. "Then you'll have a good blanket for the winter," he said, and turned his attention back to the road. The mountains rose ahead of them, already white at their peaks. The wind had picked up, bringing with it the smell of coming snow and pine and the vast emptiness of the frontier. Claire pulled the blanket higher, wrapping herself in its warmth and the strange comfort of being given a choice, even if all her choices led to the same uncertain future. Behind them, Cedar Ridge grew smaller until it was just another smudge on the horizon. Ahead, the road stretched toward whatever waited at Colt Wheeler's ranch work and warmth and the simple fact of having nowhere else to go. The sky was indeed looking like snow. The ranch house squatted low against the horizon, built to withstand wind rather than impress visitors. Behind it, the barn stood taller, its doors open to reveal the dim interior. A few horses grazed in the near pasture, their coats thick with winter coming on. Everything spoke of function over form, of a place meant for living rather than showing. Colt pulled the wagon up beside the barn. Setting the brake with practiced ease, he climbed down without ceremony, moving to unload her bag from the back. Claire sat frozen on the bench, her hands still clutching the blanket. "This is it!" The words came out sharper than she intended. He paused, her carpet bag in his hand. "This is it." She'd known not to expect luxury. Her sister's letter had made that clear enough. But faced with the reality of it, the isolation, the foreignness of everything, she felt something close to panic rise in her throat. "I can't," she heard herself say it, though she hadn't meant to speak at all. I can't just..." "All right." He set her bag down carefully beside the wagon wheel, then walked over to a tree stump near the barn door. He sat down on it, pulling out a knife and a small piece of wood from his pocket. Without another word, he began whittling, long strokes that sent pale curls falling to the dirt at his feet. Claire stared at him. "What are you doing?" "Waiting." "For what?" He glanced up at her, then back at his whittling. "For you to decide what you can or can't do." "I just told you I can't do this." "Heard you." Another curl of wood joined the others. "So, we'll sit here until you figure out what you can do." The absurdity of it struck her. Here she was, perched on a wagon in the middle of nowhere, while a stranger sat on a stump whittling as if they had all the time in the world. The sun was already slanting lower, casting long shadows across the yard. The temperature had dropped another few degrees. "It's getting cold," she said. "It is. And dark soon." "True enough." She waited for him to point out the obvious, that she had nowhere else to go, that the boarding house in town would ask questions, that her money wouldn't last. He said nothing, just kept working the wood with steady, patient strokes. A chicken wandered out from behind the barn, pecking at the ground with determined interest. It was followed by another, then another, until a small flock had gathered. They paid no attention to either human, focused entirely on whatever treasures the dirt might hold. "Are those yours?" she asked, needing to fill the silence. "They earn their keep. Do they have names?" He looked up at that, something that might have been amusement flickering across his features. "Martha names them sometimes. Says it's bad luck, getting attached to something meant for the pot. But she names them anyway." "She does." Claire watched the chickens, their simple focus on the present moment. No thought for tomorrow, no weight of yesterday, just the search for the next bit of grain. "That one's limping," she observed, pointing to a red hen with an awkward gait. Colt followed her gaze. "Fox got too close last week. She got away, but not untouched. Will she heal? Maybe, maybe not. But she's still scratching for food, still laying eggs." He went back to his whittling. "Sometimes that's enough." The words hung in the air between them. Claire felt their weight, their gentle push toward something she wasn't ready to acknowledge. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I don't need pity," she said. "Good, don't have much to spare. Or charity. Wouldn't know how to give it if I did." She studied him, this strange man who seemed content to sit on a stump while she wrestled with her pride on his wagon bench. His hands never stopped their steady work, and she found herself watching the rhythm of it, the sureness of each stroke. "What are you making?" He held up the piece still too rough to make out clearly. "Nothing in particular, just keeping my hands busy while my mind works through things." "What things?" "Whether to put the winter feed in the north section of the barn or keep it where it is, if that fence line will hold through the first real snow. How many had to sell before the cold sets in proper?" He paused. "Where to put a city woman who says she can't stay but won't climb down off the wagon." Despite everything, Claire felt her lips twitch. "I'm not a city woman." "No." "Town woman. There's a difference." "If you say so." They sat in silence again, but it was different now, less desperate. The chickens had wandered off, and somewhere in the distance, a horse called out. Another answered from the barn. "I don't know anything about ranches," she said finally. "Neither did I, once. I've never cooked over a wood stove that big." She nodded toward the house, where a chimney spoke of the massive stove it must contain. "Martha'll show you." "I can't ride." Noticed the saddle might help with that. She was running out of objections, and they both knew it. The sun touched the top of the western hills, painting everything gold and rose. Soon it would be full dark, and the temperature would drop further. "Why aren't you married?" The question surprised her as much as it seemed to surprise him. He stopped whittling for the first time, looking at the piece of wood in his hands as if it might hold the answer. Sarah died 6 years back. Fever took her and the baby both." The words were simple, factual, but Claire heard the depth beneath them. 6 years. Long enough for the sharp edges of grief to wear smooth. Not long enough to forget. "I'm sorry." He nodded, accepting the sympathy without comment. "What about you? Why aren't you married?" She could lie, make up a story about a fiancé lost to war or accident. But something about the gathering dusk and his patient presence made dishonesty impossible. "I was supposed to be Thomas Garrett, the banker's son. Everything was arranged." She touched her stomach unconsciously, a gesture that had become habit. "Then I got sick, the fever. It took things, possibilities. When I recovered and the doctor explained, Thomas decided he needed a wife who could give him sons. His loss." The simple statement, delivered in the same tone he might use to comment on a horse trade, somehow meant more than all the sympathetic murmurs she'd endured from family and neighbors. "My family disagreed. A barren woman is a burden. Better to send her west. Let someone else deal with the shame." "That what you think that you're a burden?" Claire considered the question. "I think I'm sitting on a wagon in a stranger's yard as the sun sets, with nowhere else to go and too much pride to admit it. Pride's not the worst thing to have too much of." He stood, pocketing the knife and the half-formed piece of wood. "Tell you what, come down. Have some supper. Martha's making stew. And she gets testy when people don't eat what she cooks. After that, if you still can't stay, I'll take you back to town myself." It was a lifeline, gracefully offered, a way to climb down without surrendering entirely. Claire found herself nodding before she'd consciously decided. She managed to get down on her own, though her legs were stiff from sitting so long. The blanket caught on the bench, and she fumbled to free it, aware of him standing there, not helping but not walking away either. When she finally stood on solid ground, bag in one hand and blanket in the other, he gestured toward the house. "Kitchen's through the back. Martha's probably wondering what's taking so long." They walked across the yard, their shadows stretching long before them. At the door, he stopped. "I'll eat in the barn," he said. "Got a horse needs tending." "You don't eat with your cook." "Usually. but figured you might want some time to get your bearings without me sitting across the table. Again, that careful consideration, that space given without making a fuss about it, Claire found it both comforting and unsettling. What if I decide to leave after supper? He shrugged. Then we'll load up the wagon again. Your choice. Miss Matheson, always your choice. He touched his hat brim and headed for the barn, leaving her standing at the kitchen door. Through the window, she could see warm light and the shadow of someone moving about inside. The smell of stew drifted out, rich with meat and vegetables. Claire took a breath, then knocked. The door opened to reveal a woman somewhere past 60, gray hair pinned up severely, flour still dusting her apron. Her eyes were sharp but not unkind as they took in Claire's traveling dress and uncertain expression. "So you're the one Colt went to fetch. About time. Stew's getting thick." She stepped back, holding the door wider. "Well, come on then. No sense freezing on the doorstep." The kitchen was everything Claire had expected and nothing like it at once. Large, yes, dominated by the massive stove, but also warm with more than heat rag rugs on the floor, herbs hanging from the rafters, a rocking chair by the window with knitting left in mid-row. "Sit," Martha commanded, pointing to the table. "You look ready to drop." Claire sat, still clutching the blanket. Martha bustled about, ladling stew into bowls, slicing bread with quick, efficient strokes. She set a bowl in front of Claire with a thump. "Eat. Then we'll talk about that room Colt's fixed up in the barn, unless you're planning to run off into the night like a spooked calf." "I haven't decided yet." Martha snorted. "Course you haven't. City girls never can make up their minds quick. Good thing Colt's got more patience than sense." "Town," Claire corrected quietly. "I'm from a town, not a city. Same difference out here." Martha sat down across from her with her own bowl. "Eat your stew before it gets cold. Morning comes early on a ranch." Claire picked up her spoon, surprised to find she was hungry despite everything. The stew was good, better than good. Chunks of beef, potatoes, carrots, all in a rich gravy that spoke of hours of slow cooking. Through the window, she could see light spilling from the barn doors. Somewhere in there, Colt Wheeler was eating his own supper, giving her space to think, patient as the mountains themselves. She took another bite of stew and wondered if maybe, just maybe, she could do this after all. Outside, the first stars were beginning to show. Martha led the way across the dark yard, carrying a lantern that threw wild shadows against the barn walls. Claire followed, her carpet bag bumping against her leg with each step. The night had turned properly cold now, and her breath showed white in the lantern light. "Watch that board," Martha said, pointing to a loose plank near the barn door. "Colt keeps meaning to fix it, but there's always something more pressing." Inside, the barn was warmer than Claire expected, filled with the comfortable sounds of horses shifting in their stalls and the sweet smell of hay. Martha led her past the stalls to a door at the back, painted blue once upon a time, but now faded to the color of a winter sky. "Used to be the tack room," Martha explained, lifting the latch. "But Colt fixed it up nice last month." The room was small but clean. A narrow bed with a straw mattress sat against one wall, covered with a quilt that looked handmade. There was a washstand with a china basin, a small table with an oil lamp, and hooks on the wall for clothes. A braided rug covered most of the plank floor. "Chamber pots under the bed," Martha said matter-of-factly. "Privy's out back of the house, but you won't want to trek there in the middle of the night. There's water in the pitcher, and I'll bring hot water for washing in the mornings." Claire set her bag down slowly, looking around the little room. It was rough, certainly, but care had been taken. The walls had been recently whitewashed. The window, small though it was, had clean glass and a flour sack curtain. Colt did this. Martha's expression softened slightly. "Spent every evening for 2 weeks getting it ready. Said whoever came should have a proper place, not just a corner of the barn. But he didn't know who was coming. or if anyone would come at all. No, he didn't. Martha moved to the window, adjusting the curtain unnecessarily. That's Colt for you. Does what needs doing whether it makes sense or not. Through the thin walls, Claire could hear one of the horses nickering softly. The sound was oddly comforting, a reminder of life carrying on its simple patterns all around her. "Where does he sleep?" she asked, then immediately wished she hadn't. Martha gave her a sharp look. "Has a bedroll in the main barn when weather's bad. Otherwise, he's got a hammock strung up outside under that big oak. Man spends more nights under stars than under roof." She paused at the door. "Don't go getting ideas. Girl, Colt Wheeler's the most proper man I've known. And that includes my late husband, the deacon. I wasn't. Course you weren't. Just making things clear from the start." Martha's expression gentled. "Breakfast is at 5. I'll knock when it's time. Sleep well." She left, taking the lantern with her. Claire fumbled to light the oil lamp, its warm glow filling the little room. She sat on the edge of the bed, testing it. The straw rustled but held firm. Everything was simple but solid, made to last. She unpacked slowly, hanging her 2 dresses on the hooks, placing her few underthings in the drawer of the small table. Her grandmother's Bible went on the table itself, its worn leather cover familiar under her fingers. The coins she tucked under the mattress, old habit from home. When everything was in its place, she sat back down. At a loss, it was perhaps 8 o'clock, too early to sleep despite her exhaustion. Through the window, she could see a faint light. Martha had been right. There, under the massive oak that spread its branches like a shelter, hung a hammock, and in it, just visible, the shape of a man. He'd given her the room and taken the cold October night for himself. Claire changed into her nightgown, careful in the small space. The floor was cold under her bare feet, but the rug helped. She blew out the lamp and lay down, pulling the quilt up to her chin. It smelled of lavender and lye soap, clearly recently washed. She expected to lie awake, mind churning over the strangeness of it all. Instead, exhaustion pulled her under almost immediately. Her last conscious thought was of that shape in the hammock, keeping his distance but somehow still standing guard. She woke to knocking, gentle but persistent. The room was still dark, but a different quality of dark that spoke of approaching dawn. "Miss Matheson, breakfast in 20 minutes. "I'm awake," she called back, her voice rough with sleep. She dressed quickly in her older dress, a brown wool that had seen better days but was suitable for work. Her hair she pinned up simply. No time for elaborate styles, even if anyone here would care. The walk to the house was cold enough to wake her fully. Stars still showed overhead, but the eastern sky held the faintest suggestion of light. The kitchen windows glowed warmly, a beacon in the darkness. Inside, Martha was already busy at the stove. The table was set for 2, and Claire felt a moment's confusion before remembering Colt's absence the night before. "He's already out," Martha said without turning around. "Horses don't care what time decent folk eat breakfast." She set a plate in front of Claire, eggs, biscuit, a thick slice of ham. Coffee appeared a moment later, strong enough to float a horseshoe. "I can help," Claire offered, uncomfortable being served. "Tomorrow. Today you learn where things are." Martha sat down with her own plate. "Colt says you might be helping with the cooking. If you'll have me. He mentioned your arthritis." Martha flexed her fingers, grimacing slightly. 20 years of kneading bread and wringing laundry catches up to a body. She studied Claire over her coffee cup. "You know your way around a kitchen." "My mother taught me. Nothing fancy, but I can manage." "Fancy's no good out here anyway. Can you make bread?" "Yes." "Preserve meat?" "Yes." "Kill and dress a chicken?" Claire hesitated. "I've watched it done." "Watching and doing are different things." Martha's tone was matter-of-fact, not unkind. "But you'll learn. Everyone does. or they don't last. They finished breakfast as the sky lightened outside. Martha showed her around the kitchen where the supplies were kept, how to manage the temperamental stove damper, which pots were for what purpose. Everything had its place, its purpose, its way of being done. "Lunch is at noon sharp," Martha said. "The hands come in from the range hungry as wolves. Today it's beans and cornbread. I've already got the beans soaking. Supper's at 6, after the evening chores." "How many hands?" "Just 2 right now, plus Colt, Ben Towers, and his boy Jimmy. They bunk in the small cabin past the corral." As if summoned by his name, the kitchen door opened and a man entered, grizzled, probably 50, with the bow-legged walk of a lifetime in the saddle. He stopped short, seeing Claire. "Ben, this is Miss Matheson," Martha said calmly. "She'll be helping with the household work." Ben touched his hat brim, his weathered face carefully neutral. "Ma'am." He accepted the cup of coffee Martha handed him and retreated to stand by the stove. "Where's that boy of yours?" Martha asked. "Helping the boss with that yearling? Fool thing got tangled in wire sometime in the night." "Bad." "Bad enough. They're doctoring it now." Martha tisked. "I'll heat some water. Claire, there's a basket of clean rags in the pantry. Fetch them. Would you?" Claire found the basket and brought it out. Through the window, she could see 2 figures by the corral, one tall, one smaller. Even from this distance, she could see the careful way they moved around the injured animal. "The boy's good with horses," Ben said, following her gaze. "Takes after his mother that way." "She passed?" Martha asked gently. 3 winters back, lung fever." Ben's voice was steady, but his knuckles were white around the coffee cup. "Boy wanted to stay here rather than go to his aunt in Missouri. Mr. Wheeler said if he worked hard, he could earn his keep." "How old is Jimmy?" Claire asked. 14 come spring. Small for his age, but stronger than he looks." The door opened again, and Colt entered, followed by a thin boy with sandy hair and clothes that had been mended too many times. Both had blood on their hands and shirts. "How is she?" Martha asked. "She'll heal," Colt said, moving to the wash basin. "Jimmy did good work keeping her calm." The boy flushed at the praise. Ducking his head, his eyes darted to Claire, curious but shy. "Miss Matheson," Colt said, drying his hands. "This is Jimmy Towers. Jimmy, Miss Matheson will be helping Martha with the house." "Ma'am?" Jimmy mumbled, not quite meeting her eyes. "That shirt needs mending," Martha observed, looking at the new tear in Jimmy's sleeve. "And yours too. Colt Wheeler. Blood won't come out if it sets." "I can do that," Claire said quickly. "The mending, I mean—" Everyone looked at her. She lifted her chin slightly. "I'm good with a needle. My mother insisted." "Well then," Martha moved to pour more coffee. "Seems we're sorting ourselves out just fine." The men left soon after, back to their work. Martha set Claire to preparing vegetables for the noon meal while she mixed cornbread. They worked in companionable silence, the kitchen warming as the sun rose higher. "That hammock," Claire said eventually. "Does he really sleep out there every night?" Martha's hands paused in their mixing. "Most nights, weather permitting. Started after Sarah died. Said the house felt too closed in." She resumed stirring. "Don't think it's about you being here, if that's what you're wondering. Man's got his habits." "I wasn't—" "Course you weren't." Martha's tone was dry. "Just like you weren't wondering where he slept last night." Claire felt heat rise in her cheeks, but before she could respond, Martha continued. "Colt Wheeler's a good man, better than most, but he's not looking for what your family sent you here for. You understanding me?" "I think so." "Think's not good enough. He gave you work and a place because you needed it, not because he's expecting anything in return. Man's got his own ghosts to wrestle with." Claire thought of the careful distance he maintained, the way he'd left the gifts on the fence instead of handing them to her, the room prepared with no knowledge of who might occupy it. I understand, she said more firmly. Good, then we'll get along fine. The morning passed quickly. There was wood to bring in, water to heat, bread to mind. Claire found herself falling into the rhythm of it, her hands remembering skills her mother had taught her years ago. When the men came in for lunch, she helped serve, keeping her eyes down, aware of curious glances but no comments. Colt ate quickly, discussing the afternoon's work with Ben, something about moving cattle to the lower pasture before the weather turned worse. He thanked Martha for the meal, nodded to Claire, and was gone again. Man never rests, Ben commented, sopping up bean juice with his cornbread. Been that way since I hired on. When was that? Claire asked, then wondered if she should have. 4 years back, just after. He stopped, glanced at Martha. After Sarah. Martha finished calmly. No sense dancing around it. She's gone, God rest her, and life moved on. Jimmy had been silent through the meal, but now he spoke up. Pa says Mr. Wheeler saved us, gave us work when nobody else would. Hush, boy, Ben said, but not harshly. It's true, though. Jimmy's young face was earnest. After Ma died, you couldn't hardly work for grieving, Mr. Wheeler said grief was just another kind of work that needed doing, and a man could do both if he had to. The simple wisdom of it, delivered in a boy's voice but clearly remembered from the man who'd spoken it, made Claire's throat tight. She busied herself clearing plates. The afternoon brought its own tasks. Martha showed her the vegetable garden, now mostly harvested but still needing tending. The chicken coop, where the hens clucked and fussed and one limping red hen pecked at grain with determination. The spring house, cool and dim, where milk and butter kept fresh. As the sun slanted lower, Claire found herself back in the kitchen, peeling potatoes for supper. Through the window, she could see Colt working with one of the horses, his movements patient and sure. He'd changed his torn shirt for another, but this one was worn thin at the elbows, patched in places. I'll need to get his measurements, she said, almost to herself. For the mending. Martha chuckled. Good luck with that. Man's harder to pin down than smoke. But Claire was already planning. She knew fabric, knew how to judge by eye when necessary. Her mother had taught her that too, along with so many other things she'd thought she'd never need. The sun was setting by the time the men came in for supper. They ate beef stew. Martha seemed to favor stews and discussed the next day's work. Claire listened, learning the rhythm of ranch life through their casual conversation. Fences to mend, horses to work, always something needing attention. After supper, she helped with the dishes while the men sat on the porch, the glow of a pipe visible in the darkness. Their low voices carried but not their words, a comfortable sound like distant thunder. You did well today, Martha said, drying the last plate. Better than I expected from a town girl. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Tomorrow will be harder. Every day's harder than the last out here, until you get strong enough to match it. Claire nodded, understanding this for the truth it was. She was tired, bone-deep tired, but it was a good feeling, earned, not imposed. I should get to my room, she said. Take a lantern, and Claire. Martha paused. That quilt on your bed, Sarah made it. Just thought you should know. Claire didn't know what to say to that, so she only nodded. She took the lantern and made her way across the dark yard to the barn. Inside, the horses stirred softly, recognizing her step already. Her little room welcomed her, still rough, but somehow already familiar. She changed into her nightgown, washed her face with the cold water in the pitcher, and sat on the bed to brush out her hair. Through the window, she could see the oak tree, the hammock a dim shape beneath it, but it was empty. Instead, a small fire glowed near the corral, and she could make out a figure sitting beside it, working on something in his hands, whittling, maybe, or mending tack. She thought about going out, thanking him properly for the room, for the chance, for the simple gift of not asking anything of her. But something held her back. Tomorrow, maybe, or the next day, when she'd earned her place here through work. Not just need. She lay down, pulling Sarah's quilt up to her chin. It smelled faintly of the lavender Martha had packed it with, but underneath that was something else, the ghost of another woman's life, another woman's dreams. Outside, the fire glowed steadily, and somewhere in the darkness, Colt Wheeler kept his patient vigil, asking nothing, offering everything, waiting for nothing at all. The days settled into a rhythm as October wore on. Claire rose before dawn, dressed in the darkness of her little room, and made her way to the kitchen where Martha already had coffee brewing. They worked side by side, preparing breakfast for the men, packing lunch pails when the work would keep them out on the range, starting bread or beans for later meals. Colt remained courteous but distant. He thanked her for meals, nodded when they passed in the yard, but never lingered, never spoke beyond what was necessary. She might have thought he regretted taking her in, except for the small considerations that appeared without comment, a new rope strung from house to barn to guide her way on dark mornings, fresh straw in her room when the nights grew colder, a bar of store-bought soap appearing on her washstand, though she knew Martha made their own. She learned the ways of the ranch through observation and Martha's teaching, how to gauge the stove's heat by the sound of wood settling, which hens laid best and which were bound for the pot, the different calls that meant horses were restless versus truly distressed. "You're taking to it," Martha observed one afternoon as Claire efficiently plucked a chicken for supper. "Not all do." "It's honest work," Claire said, surprised to realize she meant it. "Clear. You do a thing and it's done, not like—" She stopped, but Martha finished for her. "Not like society teas and calling cards and pretending your life's worth depends on catching the right man's eye." "Something like that." Martha snorted. "Never had patience for that nonsense myself. Lucky I married young to a man who valued sense over simpering." Claire had learned Martha's husband had been a traveling preacher who'd settled down to farm when his health failed. They'd had no children of their own. And when he died, Martha had hired on as cook at various ranches, valued for her skill and no-nonsense ways. "Why this ranch?" Claire asked. "Why stay with Colt?" Martha's hands paused in their kneading. "Because he never once made me feel like hired help. First night I was here, he said the kitchen was mine to run as I saw fit, and he meant it. Man keeps his word, even on small things, especially on small things." That evening, as Claire carried fresh water to her room, she found Jimmy Towers sitting on the barn floor, struggling with a harness that needed mending. "The leather's too stiff," he said, frustration clear in his young voice. "Pa told me to fix it, but I can't get the needle through." "May I?" Claire set down her water bucket and knelt beside him. "My father kept horses. He taught me a trick." She showed him how to soften the leather with neat's foot oil, how to use an awl to prepare the holes, how to pull the thick thread through with pliers when fingers weren't enough. Jimmy watched intently, his earlier shyness forgotten in the face of practical learning. "Your PA must have been a good teacher," he said when they'd finished. "He was." Claire handed back the mended harness. "He believed everyone should know useful things, even daughters." "Ma was like that." Jimmy's voice dropped. "She could do anything, birth a calf, set a broken bone, make bread from nothing but flour and hope." "You miss her." It wasn't a question, but Jimmy nodded anyway. "Pa says it gets easier, but I don't see how—" "Some mornings I forget she's gone, just for a second, and then remembering hits like a kick from a mule." Claire's throat tightened. She knew that feeling, though her loss was different, not a person, but possibilities. Future children who would never exist. A life that had been planned and expected and then suddenly wasn't. "I don't think it gets easier," she said carefully. "I think we just get stronger, learn to carry it better." Jimmy looked at her with eyes too old for his 14 years. "That what you're doing, getting stronger?" "Trying to." The barn door opened and Colt appeared, silhouetted against the fading light. His eyes took in the scene Claire and Jimmy on the floor, the mended harness between them. "Good work," he said to Jimmy, though Claire noticed his gaze lingered on her for a moment. "Your pa's looking for you. Supper's ready." Jimmy scrambled up, remembering his manners enough to bob his head at Claire. "Thank you, ma'am, for showing me." After he'd gone, Colt remained in the doorway. Claire rose, dusting off her skirt, aware of his presence but unsure why he stayed. "The boy's had a hard time," he said finally. "Doesn't trust Easy anymore." "He's a good kid." "He is." Colt shifted, and she could see him clearly now, the day's work written in the dust on his clothes, the weariness in the set of his shoulders. "Just wanted to say thank you for taking time with him." "It was no trouble." He nodded, started to turn, then paused. "You settling in all right? Got everything you need?" The question surprised her. He'd barely spoken to her directly in the 2 weeks she'd been here. "Yes, thank you." "The nights are getting colder. I could move the stove from the bunkhouse. Ben and Jimmy don't use it anyway. They stay by the main house fire." "I'm fine. The quilt is warm." Something flickered across his face at the mention of the quilt. "All right then, but you tell Martha if you need anything." He was gone before she could respond, striding across the yard with that steady gait she'd come to recognize. Always moving, always working, always maintaining that careful distance. The next morning brought the first hard frost. Claire woke to find ice crystals on the inside of her window, her breath visible in the cold air. She dressed quickly, shivering, and hurried to the kitchen. Martha was already there, feeding wood to the stove. "Winter's coming early. Mark my words. We'll have snow before month's end." They worked together to prepare a heartier breakfast: biscuits and gravy, fried potatoes, extra coffee. The men came in with red cheeks and chapped hands, grateful for the warmth. Ice on the water troughs. Ben reported, "Had to break it so the stock could drink." "We'll need to move the cattle down from the high pasture today," Colt said, accepting his coffee with a nod of thanks. "Can't wait any longer." "That's a 2-day job at least," Ben observed. "Then we'd better get started." Claire listened to them plan, understanding only half of what they discussed, but recognizing the urgency in their voices. Winter here wasn't just a season, it was an adversary that required strategy and preparation. After breakfast, as she was clearing dishes, Colt surprised her by speaking directly to her again. "Can you ride at all?" "No, I told you that first day." "I remember, but we could use an extra pair of hands with the cattle, even someone on foot to watch the gates while we push them through." It was the first time he'd asked anything of her beyond her household duties. Claire found herself nodding before she'd fully thought it through. "I'll help." Martha packed food for them: cold biscuits, dried meat, apples from the root cellar. Claire wrapped herself in her shawl and followed the men out to where the horses waited, already saddled. "You'll ride with me," Ben said, but Colt shook his head. "She'll walk. Safer that way." Claire felt a flash of irritation at being discussed like she wasn't there, but it faded when she saw Colt pulling something from his saddlebag, the blanket, the one he'd brought that first day. "Here," he said, handing it to her. "Wind's sharp up in the pastures." She took it, wrapping it around her shoulders over the shawl. It was heavy, warm, and still smelled faintly of sage and wood smoke. They set out, the men on horseback, Claire on foot beside them. The pace was steady but not rushed, and she found she could keep up easily. The landscape changed as they climbed from the relative shelter of the ranch buildings to open hillsides where the wind had full rein. "There," Colt pointed to a distant cluster of cattle, dark shapes against the brown grass. "Maybe 30 head. We'll push them down to the gate, then through to the lower pasture." He explained the plan. Simply Ben and Jimmy would ride wide, turning the cattle toward the gate. Colt would ride point, keeping them moving. Claire would stand by the gate, opening and closing it as needed, watching for stragglers. "Think you can manage that?" "Yes." He studied her for a moment, and she had the feeling he was seeing her clearly for the first time in days. All right, then. The work was harder than she'd expected. Cattle, she learned, had minds of their own and a talent for finding the one direction you didn't want them to go. She stood by the gate, fighting the wind that tried to tear it from her hands, counting heads as they passed through. Dust rose despite the frost, coating her dress and making her eyes water. "Hold it steady," Colt called, wheeling his horse to chase back a yearling that had broken from the group. "Few more coming." Claire braced herself, muscles straining against the gate's weight. The cattle pushed through, bawling their displeasure, and she tried to count but lost track at 20-something. Finally, Colt raised his hand all through. She latched the gate with relief, her arms aching. When she turned, Colt had dismounted and was walking toward her, leading his horse. "You did good," he said simply. "Not everyone can hold a gate in this wind." "I'm stronger than I look." "Never doubted it." He pulled a canteen from his saddle and offered it to her. "We've got 2 more pastures to clear." The water was cold and tasted of metal, but Claire drank gratefully. When she handed the canteen back, their fingers brushed briefly. Colt didn't jerk away, but he did step back, turning to survey the next hillside. "Storm coming," he said, looking at the clouds building over the mountains. "Maybe tomorrow, maybe the day after. But it's coming." They worked through the day, clearing pasture after pasture. By afternoon, Claire's feet hurt and her arms felt like lead, but she didn't complain. This was ranch work necessary, urgent, real, not the decorative existence she'd known before, where her only purpose had been to look pretty and produce heirs. As the sun slanted low, they pushed the last group through the final gate. Claire latched it and leaned against the posts, exhausted but oddly satisfied. "That's all of them," Ben said, riding up. "Good day's work." Jimmy was grinning, his young face flushed with pride and exertion. "Did you see that big bull try to break back? Thought he had me for sure, but I turned him." "You did good, son," Ben said, and Jimmy's grin widened. They rode back slowly, the horses tired, the humans more so. Claire walked between the horses, no longer needing to prove she could keep up. The blanket around her shoulders had become a welcome weight, blocking the worst of the wind. At the ranch, Martha had hot food waiting. Claire barely tasted it, exhaustion making everything blur. She helped with the dishes through habit more than consciousness, then excused herself. In her room, she sat on the bed to unlace her boots and nearly cried at the relief of freeing her swollen feet. Everything hurt, but underneath the physical discomfort was something else, a sense of accomplishment she hadn't felt in years. A knock at her door made her look up. "Yes?" "It's Jimmy, ma'am, Mr. Wheeler said to bring you this." She opened the door to find the boy holding a bucket of steaming water and a tin of salve. "For your feet," Jimmy explained, blushing. "Mister," Wheeler said. "Well, he noticed you limping that last mile." Claire took the bucket, touched despite herself. "Thank him for me." "Yes, ma'am." Jimmy hesitated. "Ma'am, you did real good today. Pa said so. Said you worked harder than some men he's known." After he left, Claire soaked her feet in the hot water, feeling the ache slowly ease. The salve smelled of camphor and mint, cooling and warming at once. Such small kindnesses, offered without fuss or expectation. Through her window, she could see the oak tree, the hammock swaying empty in the wind. But there was light in the barn, Colt checking on the horses, probably making sure they were settled after the day's work. She thought about the careful distance he maintained, the way he helped without hovering, offered without expecting. Martha had said he wasn't looking for what her family had sent her here for. But what was he looking for? Or was he, like her, simply trying to find a way through each day, carrying losses that would never fully heal? The wind picked up, rattling her window. Tomorrow would bring more work it always did, but tonight, with her feet soaking and her body exhausted from honest labor, Claire felt something she hadn't in months. Not quite peace. Not yet, but the possibility of it, distant as the mountains but just as real. Outside, the first flakes of snow began to fall. The rider appeared just after dawn, when Claire was gathering eggs and the frost still silvered every surface. She heard the hoofbeats first too fast for a neighbor's casual visit and looked up to see a man dismounting near the house. He was well dressed, his coat city-cut and unsuited to ranch work, his boots polished despite the dusty ride. She knew him before he turned. The way he stood, the set of his shoulders, Edward Hartley, her sister Martha's husband. Her stomach clenched as surely as if she'd been struck. "Claire!" He removed his hat, that same practiced gesture she remembered from family dinners. "You look, well." She stood there, eggs still warm in her apron, unable to speak, behind Edward. She saw Colt emerge from the barn, taking in the scene with a glance. "May we speak privately?" Edward asked, his eyes sliding past her to the barn. The modest buildings, the life she'd been building here. She saw judgment in that look, the same dismissive assessment her family had always made of anything common or practical. "Whatever you've come to say, you can say it here." Claire managed. Edward's mouth tightened. "Very well. Your family has reconsidered. The doctors in Boston believe new treatments might help your condition. Martha misses you. Your mother is beside herself. We want you to come home." "This is my home now." "This," Edward gestured at the ranch with barely concealed disdain. "Claire, be sensible. You're living in a barn, doing servant's work. What kind of life is that for a Matheson?" "An honest one." Colt had moved closer, not intervening, but present, a steady force at the edge of her vision. Edward noticed too, his eyes narrowing. "Is this him, the man your family arranged?" "The arrangement is dissolved." Colt said quietly, "Miss Matheson works here. That's all." Edward laughed, an ugly sound. "Works here, my sister-in-law, doing menial labor." He pulled an envelope from his coat. "I have a letter from your father, and train fare. The eastbound comes through in 3 days." Claire looked at the envelope, but didn't take it. "I'm not going back." "Don't be foolish. This arrangement, whatever it's become, it isn't proper. People will talk." "Let them." Edward's face flushed. "You're being selfish. Think of your family's reputation. Think of Martha." "Martha is the one who sent me away." The words came out harder than Claire intended. "Called me a burden. Said I was bringing shame on the family. Said it would be better if I disappeared." "She was upset. The diagnosis was a shock." "The diagnosis was an excuse." Claire felt years of hurt crystallizing into clarity. An excuse to be rid of the daughter who couldn't fulfill her purpose, who couldn't marry well and produce heirs and reflect glory on the family name. Edward stepped forward, reaching for her arm. "Claire, you're being hysterical." Colt moved then, smooth and deliberate, placing himself between them. He didn't touch Edward, didn't threaten, just stood there solid and immovable as the mountains. "The lady said she's not going back," Colt said. His voice remained quiet, but something in it made Edward step backward. "You have no right." "Neither do you." Colt glanced at Claire. "Unless I'm mistaken, Miss Matheson is of age and unmarried, makes her own choices." Edward's face went from red to white. "This is a mistake. Claire, you're throwing away your life. For what pride? Some romantic notion of independence." Claire felt the egg still warm in her apron, thought of the bread rising in the kitchen, of Jimmy learning to mend harness, of Martha's arthritis easing because she had help now. Simple things, real things. "I'm not throwing away my life," she said. "I'm finally living it." Edward stared at her for a long moment, then shook his head. "When you come to your senses, when this all falls apart, don't expect the family to welcome you back." He dropped the envelope in the dirt, mounted his horse with sharp, angry movements, and rode off without looking back. The dust of his departure hung in the air like a question. Claire stood frozen until the hoofbeats faded. Then her knees buckled, and she would have fallen if Colt hadn't caught her elbow, steadying her with minimum contact. "All right," he asked. "I don't know." She laughed, a shaky sound. "I just burned my last bridge home." "Maybe?" He released her arm, stepped back to that careful distance. "Or maybe you just stopped trying to live in a house that was never going to fit you." She looked at him, this quiet man who understood more than he ever said. "Is that what you did after Sarah?" His jaw tightened slightly, the only sign the question affected him. "Something like that." He bent and picked up the envelope, held it out to her. "Might want to read it, or burn it. Your choice." Claire took the envelope, its expensive paper smooth under her work-roughened fingers. "He'll tell them I'm ruined, living in sin with a stranger." "Are you?" The blunt question startled a laugh from her. "No." "Then what does it matter what he tells them?" She looked down at the eggs still cradled in her apron, amazingly unbroken despite everything. "I suppose it doesn't. Best get those inside before Martha comes looking. She gets testy when breakfast is late." It was so normal, so mundane after the drama of Edward's visit, that Claire found herself moving automatically. But at the kitchen door, she paused. "Thank you," she said, "for standing there, for—" "No need." He was already turning back to the barn. "You stood your own ground just fine." Inside, Martha took one look at her face and guided her to a chair. "Sit. Eggs on the table. Now. What's got you looking like you've seen a ghost?" Claire told her, words tumbling out. Martha listened, her expression darkening with each detail. "City folk," she spat when Claire finished. "Think the whole world should bend to their notions of proper— Good riddance, I say. But they're my family." "No." Martha's voice was firm. "Family doesn't throw you away when you don't match their plans. Family stands by you, like Colt stood by you just now." Claire fingered the envelope, still unopened. "I should read it." "Or you could use it for kindling. Some words don't deserve the dignity of being read." But Claire opened it anyway. Her father's handwriting, precise as always. The terms were what Edward had said: return passage, promise of medical treatment, veiled threats about permanent estrangement if she refused. At the bottom, a postscript in Martha's hand. "Please come home. Mother cries daily. This foolishness has gone on long enough." Foolishness. As if her pain, her loss, her attempt to build a new life were just childish rebellion. Claire fed the letter to the stove, watching it curl and blacken. Martha nodded approval and went back to mixing biscuit dough. The men came in for breakfast as usual, but Claire felt the undercurrent of awareness. Word traveled fast on a ranch they all knew something had happened. Jimmy kept shooting her worried glances, and Ben's weathered face was more thoughtful than usual. "Heard you had a visitor," Ben said finally. "My brother-in-law," Claire confirmed. "He's gone now." "Good." Ben's tone was definitive. "Man who can't see value in honest work's got no business here." After breakfast, Claire threw herself into chores with desperate energy. Bread to bake, floors to sweep, mending to finish. But her hands shook, and twice she had to stop and breathe through the tightness in her chest. She was bringing in wood when Colt found her, struggling with an armload too large to manage properly. "Let me," he said, taking half the wood without waiting for permission. They walked to the house in silence. But at the door, Claire couldn't hold back anymore. "They'll never take me back now. Even if I wanted, even if I had to, that door is closed." "Doors close," Colt agreed. "Others open. What if I'm making a terrible mistake? What if they're right, and I'm just being foolish and proud?" He set the wood down carefully in the box by the stove. "Are you happy here?" The question was so simple, so direct, that it cut through all her churning doubts. Was she happy? She thought of cold mornings and aching feet, of chickens that pecked and stoves that smoked. but also of Jimmy's smile when he mastered a new skill, of Martha's approving nods, of the satisfaction of bread well made and gates held steady against the wind. "I'm useful here," she said finally. "Needed." "That's not what I asked." She met his gray eyes, steady as always. "I don't know if I'm happy, but I'm not miserable. I'm not empty. That's more than I had before." He nodded as if that made perfect sense. "Then trust that rest will sort itself out or it won't, but at least you're moving forward instead of standing still." He left her there, surrounded by wood and warmth and the ordinary business of living. Martha came in, took one look at her, and set her to kneading bread. "Nothing like working dough to work out troubles," she said. "Pound it good. Bread can take it." Claire did, putting all her fear and anger and uncertainty into the rhythm of it. Push, fold, turn. Push, fold, turn. The familiar motion, the give and resistance of the dough, slowly calmed her racing thoughts. "Question for you," Martha said, peeling potatoes with quick efficiency. "If that fancy man had offered to take you back, no conditions, family welcoming you with open arms, would you have gone?" Claire's hands stilled. Would she back to the house where she'd grown up? To the life mapped out for her since birth, where her worth was measured in her ability to marry well and produce heirs? "No," she said, surprising herself with the certainty of it. "No, I wouldn't." "Then what are you fretting about? You're exactly where you choose to be." That afternoon, the threatened snow arrived in earnest, fat flakes that quickly covered the ground, muffling sound and softening the harsh edges of the landscape. Claire watched from the window as Colt and Ben worked to secure everything extra hay to the barn, tarps over the woodpile, shutters closed on unused buildings. "Storm's settling in," Martha observed. "Could be days before it clears." Claire thought of Edward, hopefully well on his way back to town before the worst of it hit. Let him carry tales back east. Let them think what they wanted. She was here. She was working. She was choosing her own path. That evening, with snow still falling steadily, everyone gathered in the kitchen after supper. Even Colt stayed, though he kept to his corner, working on a piece of leather. Jimmy was practicing his letters on a slate Martha had taken on his education along with everything else. Ben smoked his pipe and told stories of other winters, other storms. "Remember that blizzard of 81 inches, he asked Colt, lost near half the herd that year?" "Before my time," Colt replied. "But Sarah's father told me about it. Said they burned furniture before it was over, trying to keep warm." It was the first time Claire had heard him mention Sarah naturally, without the careful pause that usually preceded her name. She looked up from her mending to find him watching her, something almost like a question in his eyes. "We're better prepared now," Martha said firmly. "Wood stacked high, root cellar full, hay enough for the stock. We'll weather it fine." "Always do," Ben agreed. The wind picked up, rattling the windows, but inside was warmth and light and the quiet companionship of people who'd chosen to face whatever came together. Claire bent back to her mending, adding her own small contribution to the circle. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the tracks of her brother-in-law's horse, covering the old paths that might have led her back to a life that no longer fit. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, it always did. But tonight, with her new family around her and honest work for her hands, Claire Matheson was exactly where she belonged. The letter was ashes now, its threats and promises equally meaningless. She'd made her choice. Now all that remained was to live it, one day at a time, one storm at a time, building a life worth having from the simple materials at hand. When she finally retired to her room, the barn was warm despite the storm. Through her small window, she could see nothing but swirling white, but somewhere out there, she knew, Colt would be checking the animals one last time, making sure all was secure, taking care, as he always did, without fuss or expectation of thanks. She pulled Sarah's quilt up to her chin and listened to the wind. It sounded like freedom. The snow had melted into mud by the time Colt brought out the Appaloosa mare. Claire stood by the corral fence, watching the horse move with a mixture of admiration and apprehension. The mare was smaller than the working horses, her spotted coat gleaming in the weak November sun. "Her name's Sage," Colt said, running his hand along the mare's neck. "Gentle as they come. Sarah trained her from a foal." There it was again, Sarah's name spoken naturally, without the old weight of grief. Claire had noticed it happening more often since the storm, since Edward's visit, as if something had shifted in the careful boundaries they all maintained. "She's beautiful," Claire said, meaning it. The mare turned intelligent eyes toward her, nostrils flaring slightly to catch her scent. "Come here." Colt opened the gate. "Waiting. Time you met properly." Claire entered the corral slowly, aware of the mare's watchful attention. Colt took her hand the first time he'd deliberately touched her since that first day and placed it on Sage's neck. The coat was softer than she expected, warm with life and sun. "Let her know you," he said, stepping back but staying close. "Horses read people better than people read themselves." Sage stood quietly as Claire stroked her neck, learning the feel of muscle and bone beneath the spotted hide. The mare's breathing was steady, calming, and Claire found her own breath matching it. "Good," Colt said. "Now, the saddle." He'd already set it on the fence, the same one he'd brought that first day. Up close, she could see the careful workmanship, the places where use had darkened the leather but not weakened it. "It was Sarah's," he said, answering her unspoken question. "Bought it for her wedding gift. She always said—" He paused, then continued. "She said it should go to someone who needed to find their own trail." Claire touched the smooth leather, understanding the gift for what it was, not just equipment, but trust, acceptance, a piece of the past offered to help build a future. "I don't want to damage it," she said. "It's meant to be used. Things that sit idle rot. Sarah knew that better than anyone." He showed her how to approach with the saddle blanket first, letting Sage see it, smell it, how to lay it smooth on the mare's back, checking for wrinkles that could rub. The saddle itself was heavier than she expected, and Colt had to help her lift it into place. "Don't worry about doing it alone yet," he said. "Took me months to manage it smooth. Jimmy still struggles sometimes." They worked through the process, cinch and stirrups, bridle and bit. Colt's instruction was patient, specific, his hands guiding hers when needed but always withdrawing after. By the time they finished, Claire's arms ached, but she understood the mechanics of it, the logic of leather and buckles. "Now," Colt said, "time to get on." Claire looked up at Sage, who suddenly seemed much taller. "Maybe we should—" "You've put it off long enough." His tone was gentle but firm. "Can't learn to ride from the ground." He showed her how to mount from the left, where to put her hands, how to swing her leg over despite her skirts. It took 3 tries, but finally she was up, heart pounding, hands clutching the saddle horn. The world looked different from horseback, higher, wider, full of new possibilities and dangers. Sage shifted slightly, and Claire gasped, certain she would fall. "Breathe," Colt said, one hand on Sage's bridle. "She's not going anywhere, just getting used to you up there." "I'm too high." "You're right where you should be. Look ahead, not down. Trust the horse." Easy for him to say, but Claire forced her eyes up, focusing on the distant mountains instead of the ground that seemed so far away. Gradually, her death grip on the saddle horn eased. "Better now. Hold the reins like this." He showed her, his hands briefly covering hers to demonstrate the proper grip. "Not too tight. You're having a conversation, not an argument." For the next hour, he led Sage around the corral while Claire learned to find her balance. Walk only. Nothing faster, but even that felt like flying to someone who'd never been on horseback. Her legs cramped from gripping too hard. Her back ached from tension, But underneath the discomfort was something else, a thrill of accomplishment. "That's enough for today," Colt said finally, bringing Sage to a halt. "Don't want you too sore to work tomorrow." He helped her dismount, catching her when her legs nearly buckled. For a moment she was pressed against him, feeling the solid warmth of his chest, smelling leather and hay and the indefinable scent that was uniquely his. Then he stepped back, that careful distance restored. "You did well," he said. "Natural seat. You'll be riding out to check fences in no time." Claire laughed, shaky with adrenaline. "I barely survived walking in a circle." "Everyone starts somewhere." He began unsaddling Sage with practiced efficiency. Sarah fell off 3 times her first day, climbed back on every time, mad as a wet cat but determined. "You reminded me of her up there, that look that says you'll master this or die trying." It was the most he'd ever said about Sarah directly to her. Claire sensed the gift in it, the trust. She helped him carry the tack back to the barn, hanging each piece in its proper place. "Thank you," she said, "for the lesson, for everything." He nodded, already moving to the next task, always working, always moving forward. But there was something easier in his manner now, as if teaching her had loosened some knot he'd been carrying. Over the next weeks, the lessons continued. Every few days, weather permitting, they worked with Sage. Claire's body adapted slowly, muscles she didn't know she had made themselves known through soreness. But gradually she grew stronger, more confident. "Stop thinking so much," Colt told her one afternoon as she struggled with turning Sage smoothly. "You're trying to plan every movement. Trust your body to know what to do." "My body doesn't know anything about horses." "Knows more than you think. Humans have been riding longer than they've been writing. It's in there somewhere." She tried to let go, to stop analyzing every shift of weight and pull of rein. Sage responded immediately, turning smoothly where before she'd resisted. "There," Colt said with satisfaction. "Felt that, didn't you, the difference?" Claire nodded, amazed. For a moment, she and the mare had moved as one thing, not two creatures trying to negotiate. "Can we go faster?" she asked, emboldened by success. Colt considered. "Little trot. Maybe, you sure?" She wasn't, but she nodded anyway. He showed her how to signal Sage, how to rise and fall with the gait. The first few minutes were torture. She bounced like a sack of grain, teeth jarring with every step. Then something clicked, and she found the rhythm. "Good," Colt called, real pleasure in his voice. "That's it." She made it halfway around the corral before losing the rhythm and having to slow back to a walk. But triumph sang through her veins. She had really ridden, not just sat while a horse walked. "I did it," she breathed, grinning down at Colt. He smiled back, a real smile that transformed his weathered face. "You did. Sarah always said—" He stopped, the smile fading slightly. "She said the moment when it clicks, when you stop being cargo and start being a rider, that's when you're hooked for life." Was she right? Usually was, about horses at least. He took Sage's bridle as Claire dismounted, her legs steadier now with practice. You want to learn to groom her important as riding, knowing how to care for them. They worked together in the barn, Colt showing her how to use the brushes, how to check hooves for stones, how to feel for heat or swelling that might indicate injury. His instruction was thorough, but not hovering. He'd demonstrate, then step back and let her try. "Why didn't you remarry?" Claire asked suddenly, surprising herself. They'd been working in comfortable silence, but something about the quiet barn and the rhythm of brushing made the question emerge. 6 years is a long time. His hands stilled for a moment, then resumed their steady work. "Never found reason to—" "Martha says women in town have tried to catch your attention." "Martha talks too much." "She cares about you." "I know." He moved around Sage's other side, voice coming muffled. Just never seemed right, trying to replace what couldn't be replaced. Claire focused on a particularly stubborn tangle in Sage's mane. Maybe it's not about replacing. Maybe it's about building something new. The silence stretched long enough that she wondered if she'd overstepped. Then he said, maybe. But building takes two people willing to pick up hammers. She thought about that as they finished grooming Sage and turned her out to pasture. Two people willing to build. Was that what they were doing here? In their careful, distant way, building something undefined and unnamed but real nonetheless. That evening, she found Jimmy practicing with a lasso in the yard. His young face set in concentration. The rope tangled more often than not, but he kept trying. "Colt teach you that?" she asked. "Yes'm. Says I need to know everything if I want to be a real hand someday." He coiled the rope to try again. "He's teaching you to... riding, I mean." "He is." "That's good." Jimmy made his throw, actually catching the fence post he'd aimed for. "He's been different since you came. Still quiet and all, but different." "Different how?" Jimmy struggled to find words. "Like, he remembers there's things besides work. He actually sat with us through a whole supper last week. Hasn't done that in years." Claire filed that away. Another piece of the puzzle that was Colt Wheeler. A man who'd retreated so far into routine and isolation that sharing a meal had become remarkable. "Can you show me?" she asked, indicating the rope. "The lasso." Jimmy's face lit up, teaching someone else what he'd learned. He was patient, and clear Colt's influence showing. Claire managed one successful catch in a dozen tries, but Jimmy cheered as if she'd roped a bull. "You'll get it," he assured her. "Colt says everything worth doing takes time to learn proper." Everything worth doing. Claire thought about that later, settling into her room for the night. The riding. Yes, but maybe more than that. Maybe the slow, careful process of two damaged people learning to trust again. The building of something new from the ashes of old dreams. Through her window, she could see light from the barn where Colt was making his final rounds. Always checking, always making sure all was well. Tomorrow they'd ride again, and she'd try the trot for longer, push herself further. Tomorrow she'd cook and clean and mend. The ordinary work that had become her life. But tonight, she rubbed the soreness from her legs and smiled, remembering the moment when she and Sage had moved together, when Colt had smiled that rare, true smile. Building indeed. One lesson, one day, one small trust at a time. The whispers started at the general store on a Tuesday morning in late November. Claire had ridden in with Martha on the supply wagon. She could manage Sage well enough now, but the muddy roads made wagon travel more practical. They'd split the list, Martha heading for the dry goods while Claire gathered flour and coffee. She was reaching for a tin of baking powder when she heard it Mrs. Holcomb's voice, pitched to Carrie. Living right there on his property, bold as brass, not even a pretense of propriety. "Well, what can you expect, Mrs.?" Durant replied. "A woman who'd leave her family's home to work as a servant. There's a name for that sort." Claire's hand froze on the tin. She knew they meant her to hear women like Mrs. Holcomb never accidentally spoke too loud. "I heard she shares his meals, rides his horses." Mrs. Garrett, the banker's wife, mother of Thomas who'd rejected her, had joined the conversation. "My son was fortunate to escape that entanglement." "Indeed, though one wonders what hold she has on Mr. Wheeler. He seemed such a respectable man before." Claire forced herself to complete her motion, placing the baking powder in her basket with steady hands. She moved to the counter where Mr. Patterson waited, his weathered face carefully neutral. "That'll be all. Miss Matheson?" he asked, already tallying her purchases. "Yes, thank you." She paid with coins from the ranch fund, aware of the women watching her every move. As she gathered her purchases, Mrs. Holcomb stepped directly into her path. "Miss Matheson." The woman's smile was sharp as winter ice. "How fortunate to see you. We were just discussing the impropriety of certain living arrangements." Claire met her gaze squarely. How kind of you to take such interest in others' lives. You must have so little of interest in your own. Mrs. Holcomb's face flushed. Well, I never... No, Claire agreed. I don't imagine you have. She stepped around the woman and walked out, head high, though her hands shook as she loaded the supplies into the wagon. Martha appeared moments later, her own face tight with anger. Heard them in the back, she said shortly. Bunch of dried-up biddies with nothing better to do than flap their gums. They rode back in silence, but Claire felt the weight of those words pressing down. She'd known this would come. Had been waiting for it, really, a woman living unmarried on a man's property. Regardless of the circumstances, of course, people would talk. That evening, she worked mechanically through dinner preparations, her mind elsewhere. Jimmy chattered about his day. Ben discussed plans for winter fence repairs, but Colt was quieter than usual, his gray eyes watchful. After the meal, as she cleared dishes, he lingered. Something happened in town, he said, not a question. Nothing important. Claire, just her name, but the way he said it made her stop. Turned to face him. What happened? She told him briefly, trying to make light of it. His face darkened with each word. I'll speak to them, he said when she finished. No. The word came out sharper than intended. That would only make it worse. Make it seem like there's something to defend. There is something to defend. Your reputation. My reputation was ruined the day my family sent me west like unwanted goods. She turned back to the dishes. Let them talk. But the talk didn't stop. It grew. Fed by speculation and boredom and the human love of scandal. Claire noticed it in small ways, how conversations stopped when she entered the store. How women drew their skirts aside when she passed. How even some of the ranch hands from neighboring properties looked at her differently when they came to do business with Colt. She tried to ignore it, throwing herself into work, but she saw how it affected others. Jimmy came home from town one day with a split lip, refusing to say what had caused the fight. Ben's jaw tightened whenever he returned from errands. Even Martha, indomitable Martha, seemed worn down by the constant need to defend their household. The breaking point came on a Sunday morning in early December. Claire had gone to check on the chickens and found several dead, their necks wrung. Pinned to the coop door was a note, "Whores and their protectors aren't welcome here." She stared at the paper, fury and hurt warring in her chest. The chickens, innocent creatures killed to make a point. Her hands shook as she unpinned the note. What's wrong? She hadn't heard Colt approach. He took in the scene, the dead birds, the note in her hand, and his face went very still. He took the paper from her, read it, then carefully folded it and put it in his pocket. I'll handle this, he said quietly. Colt. I'll handle it, he repeated, and something in his tone made her step back. He saddled his horse and rode out without another word. Claire cleaned up the carnage, helped by a silent Jimmy who'd appeared to do his morning chores. They buried the chickens behind the barn, saying nothing because there was nothing to say. Colt didn't return for lunch, or dinner. Martha kept the food warm without comment, but worry creased her face. It was full dark when they finally heard hoofbeats. He came in quietly, hat in hand, a bruise darkening his left cheekbone. His knuckles were split and swollen. Colt Wheeler, what have you done? Martha demanded. Had some conversations. He moved to the wash basin, wincing as the water hit his damaged hands. Made some things clear. You fought. I defended what's mine to defend. He looked at Claire then, and she saw something fierce in his usually calm eyes. This ranch, the people on it, that's my right. You'll have made it worse, Claire said, heart sinking. They'll say you're proving their point. Let them say what they want. He dried his hands carefully. But they'll say it quietly now, and they'll keep their hands off what belongs here. I don't belong to the ranch, he finished. You belong to the ranch, same as Martha, same as Ben and Jimmy. You work here, you live here. You're under my protection. That's how it is. The words should have angered her the assumption of authority, the protectiveness she hadn't asked for. Instead, she felt something warm unfurl in her chest. Protected. Not owned, not controlled, but protected. Part of something bigger than herself. "Who did you hit?" Martha asked, practical as always. Tom Garrett had some words to say about Claire. He won't be saying them anymore. Colt flexed his fingers, testing the damage. And Will Holcomb learned that killing livestock on my property has consequences. Mrs. Holcomb's son. Claire sank into a chair. "Oh, Colt, she'll make this so much worse." "No," he said firmly. "She won't." Had a conversation with her husband, too. Made it clear that harassment stops now, or I'll take it to the sheriff. Man was properly embarrassed by what his wife and son have been up to. He sat down heavily, exhaustion showing through his usual composure, without thinking. Claire fetched the salve they used for cuts and scrapes, pulling a chair close to tend his hands. "You shouldn't have done this," she said softly, carefully applying the salve to his split knuckles. "I'm not worth—" "Don't," his voice was rough. "Don't say you're not worth defending. Not to me." Their eyes met and held, something shifting in the space between them. Claire realized she was still holding his hand, could feel the calluses and scars of years of hard work, the warmth of his skin against hers. "People will talk more now," she said, not pulling away. "Maybe, but they'll be careful about what they say and where they say it." He turned his hand slightly, his thumb brushing her wrist. "I'm sorry about the chickens. I'll get you new ones from the Baxter place." "That's not—" She stopped. Understanding this was how he showed care. Practical solutions to practical problems. "Thank you." Martha cleared her throat, and Claire realized they'd been sitting there, hands linked for longer than medicinal attention required. She pulled back, face warming. "I'll heat your supper," Martha said to Colt, but her eyes held approval. "And brew some willow bark tea for those hands." The next few days were tense, everyone waiting to see what repercussions would come. But surprisingly, the whispers died down. Claire still felt eyes on her in town, but no one spoke loud enough for her to hear. The minister's wife even nodded to her, a small acknowledgement that felt like victory. Colt must have put the fear of God into them. Ben observed one evening. "Haven't seen the gossips this quiet since the tornado of '78. But Claire noticed the cost. Colt moved stiffly for days, his hands slow to heal. Worse was the wariness in his eyes, the way he watched the horizon as if expecting trouble to ride in. He'd made enemies defending her, had spent precious social capital he'd built over years of quiet respectability. One evening, she found him by the corral, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and rose. She joined him at the fence, standing close enough to share warmth against the December chill. "I never thanked you properly," she said, "for what you did." "No thanks needed." "There is, though—" She struggled to find the right words. "No one's ever fought for me before. Not like that. Not when it cost them something." He was quiet for a long moment. "Sarah used to say I was too quick with my fists when I was younger, too ready to solve problems with force. I worked hard to change that, to be the kind of man she could be proud of. Thoughtful, careful." He flexed his still healing hands. "But when I saw that note, heard what they'd been saying about you, careful went out the window." "I'm glad," Claire admitted. "I know I shouldn't be. I know violence doesn't really solve anything. But I'm glad you cared enough to be angry." "I more than care," he said quietly, then seemed to catch himself. "That is, you're part of this ranch now. Family, like Martha says. And family stands up for family." Family. The word lodged in Claire's chest, warm and complicated. She'd been cast out by blood family, but here, in this unlikely place, she'd found something else. People who defended her, worked beside her, accepted her as she was. "Yes," she agreed, Family. They stood together watching the last light fade, shoulders almost touching, surrounded by the quiet sounds of the ranch settling for night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, it always did. The gossips might be silenced for now, but human nature didn't change easily. But tonight, Claire felt safe, protected, part of something worth defending. And if she felt something more, a warmth that had nothing to do with family when Colt stood this close, a flutter in her chest when their eyes met well, that was a complication for another day. For now, it was enough to stand here, accepted and defended, watching stars appear one by one in the vast Montana sky. "Come on," Colt said finally. "Martha'll have our hides if we're late for supper again." They walked back together, careful not to touch but close enough that their shadows merged into one in the lamplight spilling from the kitchen window. Behind them, the mountains stood eternal and unchanged, keeping their secrets and their silence. Let the town whisper, Claire thought. Here on the ranch, she'd found something stronger than gossip, a place where broken people could stand together and build something whole. The storm hit just after midnight, waking Claire with the sound of wind screaming through the rafters. She lay in her narrow bed, listening to the barn groan under the assault, when she heard something else, horses, frightened and calling out. She dressed quickly in the dark, fingers fumbling with buttons. The wind nearly tore the door from her hands when she opened it. Snow drove horizontally, stinging her face like tiny needles. She could barely see 3 feet ahead. The horses were panicking in their stalls, eyes rolling white. One, the bay gelding Colt had been training, had managed to break his stall door and was loose in the barn, crashing into walls in blind terror. "Easy, easy," Claire called, but the wind swallowed her voice. She grabbed a rope from the wall, trying to approach the gelding, but he reared, hooves flashing dangerously close to her head. She stumbled back, tripped over something in the dark, went down hard. Then Colt was there, materializing from the storm like a ghost. He moved past her to the horse, his voice cutting through the wind somehow, low and steady. The gelding stopped rearing, though he still trembled and rolled his eyes. "You hurt?" Colt asked without turning around. "No, I heard them panicking." "Good instincts. This one would have hurt himself bad." He had the rope now, was easing it over the gelding's neck. "Can you get the stall door?" She scrambled up, wrestling the broken door back into place while Colt soothed the horse. Together they got him secured, then checked the others. 2 more had loosened boards in their panic. "Hold this." Colt handed her his lantern and grabbed tools from the wall. She held the light steady while he made emergency repairs, the wind trying to tear them both into the night. It took an hour to secure everything. By the time they finished, Claire was soaked through and shivering. Colt wasn't much better. Ice crystals in his hair, his jacket stiff with frozen snow. "Back to the house," he said, raising his voice over the storm. "Can't do more tonight." But when they reached the door, the wind hit with renewed fury, actually driving them back a step. Claire couldn't see the house at all, just a wall of white. Too dangerous. Colt decided, "We'll wait it out here." He led her to the small tack room at the back of the barn, shutting the door against the worst of the wind. It was marginally warmer here, though their breath still showed white. He lit a lantern, revealing saddles on stands, bridles hanging on pegs, the neat order of a working space. "There's horse blankets," he said, already pulling them down. "Not ideal, but better than nothing." Claire's teeth were chattering too hard to reply. Her dress was soaked, the wet fabric leaching what little warmth she had left. Colt wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, then another, his hands impersonal but gentle. "Need to get warm," he said. "Sit here." He cleared a space on the floor, laying out more blankets. Claire sank down gratefully, pulling the covers tight. Colt sat beside her close but not touching, always that careful distance. They sat in silence, listening to the storm rage outside. The horses had calmed now that the immediate danger was past. Occasional snorts and stamps, the only sounds besides the wind. "You came out to check them too," Claire observed when she could speak without stammering. "Couldn't sleep. Storm like this. Sometimes they hurt themselves trying to get out." He shifted slightly. "You did good, trying to catch that bay. Quick thinking. I nearly got my head kicked in." "But you tried. Not everyone would." The lantern flickered, making shadows dance on the walls. Claire pulled the blankets tighter, but cold had settled deep in her bones. She couldn't stop shivering. "Here," Colt said quietly. "Can't have you catching pneumonia." He opened his own blanket, creating a shared space. After a moment's hesitation, Claire moved closer, letting him wrap the blanket around them both. His warmth was immediate, solid, smelling of leather and hay and safety. "This is highly improper," she said, needing to acknowledge it. "So is freezing to death for the sake of propriety." They sat shoulder to shoulder, sharing warmth while the storm raged. Claire was acutely aware of every point of contact, his arm against hers, the rise and fall of his breathing, the way he held himself carefully still as if she were a wild creature that might bolt. "Tell me about her," she said suddenly. "About Sarah." She felt him tense. "Why?" "Because she's here anyway. In the saddle I ride, the quilt I sleep under, the careful way you keep your distance. I'd rather know her than always wonder." He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "She was nothing like you'd expect a rancher's wife to be. Tiny thing, barely came up to my shoulder. But fierce. Lord, she was fierce. First time I saw her, she was facing down a bull that had gotten loose in town. Everyone else running. And there's this slip of a girl with a parasol, whacking it on the nose and scolding it like a naughty child." Despite everything, Claire smiled. "Did it work?" Bull was so surprised it actually backed up. "I got a rope on it while it was trying to figure out what happened." His voice warmed with memory. "She turned to me cool as you please and said, 'Thank you, sir,' but I had the situation in hand, still holding that ridiculous parasol like a sword." "You loved her very much." "I did. Simple. Honest. Thought I'd die when she did. Probably would have, if there hadn't been so much work to do. Ranch doesn't stop for grief." Claire thought of her own losses different but real. The future she'd planned. The children she'd never have. The life that had crumbled with a doctor's pronouncement. "Sometimes work is all that holds us together," she said. "Sometimes." He shifted slightly, his arm pressing more firmly against hers. "But sometimes people surprise you, make you realize you've been holding yourself together so tight you forgot there might be another way to be." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Claire turned to look at him and found him already watching her, those gray eyes serious in the lantern light. "Colt, I know," he said quietly. "I know all the reasons this is complicated. You work for me. People already talk. You've been hurt enough without me adding to it. What if I don't want you to be careful anymore?" The question surprised them both, but Claire realized she meant it. These months of careful distance, of maintained boundaries they'd been necessary, giving her time to heal, to find her feet. But somewhere between learning to ride and fighting storms together, something had shifted. "Claire," her name was rough on his lips, "you don't know what you're saying." "Don't I? I'm a grown woman who's lost everything once already. I know exactly what I'm risking." He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw the war in his eyes want against wisdom, hope against history. Then, slowly, as if giving her every chance to pull away, he lifted his hand to her face. His palm was warm against her cheek, calloused but gentle. "You sure?" he asked. Instead of answering, she leaned into his touch. It was such a small thing, but it felt like crossing a bridge she couldn't uncross. His thumb brushed her cheekbone, and she closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the tenderness of it. "Claire!" Her name again. Different this time. wonder in it, and something that might have been pain. "I don't want to hurt you." "You won't. You can't know that." She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze steadily. "I know you've kept yourself apart for 6 years rather than risk caring again. I know you sleep outside rather than in the house you shared with her. I know you defend people who matter to you even when it costs you. That tells me everything I need to know." Something broke in his expression then, that careful control finally cracking. He pulled her against him properly, her head fitting perfectly beneath his chin. She felt him breathe out, long and shaky, like a man setting down a weight he'd carried too long. They stayed like that while the storm gradually wore itself out, not speaking, not moving beyond what warmth required, just being together, while the world raged white outside their small shelter. When dawn came, pale and uncertain through the cracks in the walls, they were still entwined. Claire woke first, stiff and cold despite the shared warmth, to find Colt watching her. "Storms passed," he said softly. "Yes." Neither moved. In the growing light, she could see the uncertainty creeping back into his eyes, the careful distance trying to reassert itself. "Don't," she said. "Don't pull away now." "People will talk more than ever. Let them. You deserve better than—" She stopped him with a finger to his lips. "I deserve to choose. And I choose this. You. Whatever that means. However long it takes to figure out." He caught her hand, pressed a kiss to her palm. Such a simple gesture, but it made her heart race like all their careful months of distance hadn't. "All right," he said. "All right." They untangled themselves, shaking out stiff limbs. The barn was peaceful now, horses calling soft greetings as they stirred. Outside, the world was transformed white and pristine, last night's violence hidden under smooth drifts. They walked to the house together, no longer maintaining that careful space. Martha took one look at them and snorted. "About time," she said. "Thought you two would dance around each other forever. Now sit, breakfast, and then we dig out from this mess." As simple as that, as complicated as everything. Over breakfast, while Jimmy chattered about the snow and Ben planned the day's necessary work. Claire caught Colt watching her. When their eyes met, he smiled, small but real, a promise of possibilities. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, setting the snow to sparkling like scattered diamonds. There would be work paths to clear, animals to tend, damage to assess. There would be talk in town, consequences to face, futures to navigate. But for now, Claire ate Martha's biscuits and felt the warmth of being exactly where she belonged. Not alone in her grief, not carefully distant, but part of something, part of someone, maybe, given time and courage. The storm had passed. What came next was up to them. The days after the storm passed in a strange new rhythm. Colt still rose before dawn, still worked until after dark, but now his hand might brush Claire's as she passed him coffee. He might stand closer than necessary while she cooked. Small changes, invisible to anyone not watching for them, but Claire felt each one like a spark against her skin. They hadn't kissed, hadn't done more than that night in the barn holding each other against the cold. But something fundamental had shifted, and everyone on the ranch seemed to sense it. Martha hummed more while she worked. Jimmy grinned whenever he caught them looking at each other. Even Ben's weathered face showed approval. It was the second week of December when Claire decided to work on her surprise. She'd been planning it for weeks, ever since she'd noticed how thin Colt's work shirts had become. Martha helped her take measurements from his clothes while he was out on the range. "About time someone looked after that man properly," Martha said, checking the shoulder width. "Sarah used to make all his shirts, but he's been making do with store-bought since. Never fits right." Claire had found good fabric on her last trip to town, sturdy cotton in deep blue that would bring out his eyes, though she'd never admit that's why she chose it. She worked on it in the evenings, after the regular mending was done, hiding it whenever she heard his step. "What are you making?" Jimmy asked one night. catching her at it. "Christmas gift," Claire said, then looked at him thoughtfully. "What does Colt usually do for Christmas?" Jimmy shrugged. "Not much. Martha makes a special dinner. We all eat together. But Mr. Wheeler, he usually finds somewhere to be alone after." Claire's heart ached at that image Colt withdrawing even on Christmas, carrying his grief like a shield against joy. "Well, maybe this year will be different," she said. She was working on the collar, the trickiest part one evening, when shouting from outside made her jump. Men's voices, urgent. She dropped the shirt and ran out to find chaos in the yard. Colt was on the ground, Ben and Jimmy supporting him. Blood ran from a gash on his forehead, more soaking through his torn shirt at the shoulder. His face was white with pain. "What happened?" Claire's voice came out surprisingly steady. "Stallion spooked," Ben said grimly. "Knocked him into the fence. Think his shoulder's dislocated." "Get him inside, Martha." They half-carried Colt to the kitchen, where Martha was already clearing the table. Claire's mind went sharp and focused, the way it had when her father's horses were injured. "Hot water," she ordered Jimmy. "Clean cloth. Martha, where's the medical supplies?" "Cabinet by the stove." Martha was checking Colt's head wound. "Gash isn't deep, but shoulders are tricky." Colt tried to sit up. "I'm fine." "You're not," Claire said firmly, pressing him back down. "Ben, hold him steady. Colt, this is going to hurt." She'd seen her father reset a shoulder once, remembered the technique, before Colt could protest further. She gripped his arm and pulled sharp, decisive. The joint slipped back with an audible pop. Colt made a sound between a gasp and a curse, his good hand gripping the table edge white-knuckled. "Done," Claire said, already moving to clean the head wound. "Worst is over." She worked quickly, efficiently, aware of his eyes on her as she cleaned and bandaged. His shirt was ruined, so she sent Jimmy for a fresh one while she tended the shoulder, wrapping it to keep it stable. "Where did you learn that?" Colt asked, his voice rough. "My father, he said everyone should know basic doctoring, even daughters." She tied off the bandage. "How's the pain?" "Manageable." He caught her hand as she turned away. "Claire, thank you." "Just returning the favor," she said, thinking of all the small cares he'd shown her. "Though I'd prefer if you didn't make a habit of fighting horses." "Wasn't fighting. Was trying to get him used to saddle." He had other ideas. He winced as he tried to move. "Probably ruined any chance of training him now." "Oh, I don't know," Claire said. "Sometimes the difficult ones just need a different approach." She stayed close that evening, watching for signs of concussion. Colt submitted to her fussing with surprising grace, though he drew the line at being helped to eat. "I'm injured, not invalid," he grumbled. But when bedtime came and he headed for the door toward his hammock or the barn, Claire stopped him. "You're sleeping in a real bed tonight. That shoulder needs rest." "Claire." "Doctor's orders." She softened her tone. "Please, just tonight. Take the spare room." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. It was a small victory, but it felt significant. Colt Wheeler, actually sleeping under his own roof. The next morning, she found him at the kitchen table before dawn, attempting to pull on his boots one-handed. "Absolutely not," she said, taking the boot from him. "That shoulder needs at least a week." "Ranch doesn't stop for injuries." "No, but Ben can handle things for a few days, and I can help." "You—" She bristled at his tone. "I've been here 3 months. I know the routine. I can feed stock, check water, even ride fence if needed. In December in skirts. Then I'll wear something else." She met his stubborn look with one of her own. "You trusted me enough to teach me. Trust me enough to help now." He studied her, and she saw him weighing options. "Finally." He sighed. "All right, but you take Jimmy with you. And if the weather turns, we come straight back, I promise." And so Claire found herself dressed in a pair of Jimmy's outgrown trousers and one of Colt's old coats, riding Sage through the morning cold while Jimmy chattered beside her on his paint pony. They checked the cattle in the near pasture, broke ice on the water troughs, distributed hay from the sledge they pulled. "You're getting good at this," Jimmy observed as they worked. "Bet you never thought you'd be doing ranch work when you lived back east." "No," Claire agreed, hefting another forkful of hay. "I thought I'd be hosting tea parties and managing servants." "You sorry?" She paused, looking out over the white-dusted range, the mountains rising fierce and beautiful in the distance. Thought of Colt waiting back at the house, probably fretting about everything that might go wrong. Of Martha in the kitchen, preparing lunch for hungry workers. Of Ben's quiet competence and Jimmy's eager enthusiasm. Her chosen family. "No," she said firmly. "I'm not sorry at all." They worked through the morning, Claire learning more about the daily operations than she had in all her weeks of watching. By the time they returned, she was tired but exhilarated, understanding better what Colt faced every day. She found him where she'd left him, though he'd managed to drag himself to the window where he could watch their approach. "Everything's fine," she reported. "Cattle fed, water flowing, no problems." "I saw," something soft in his expression. "You did good." That evening, after dinner, Claire presented him with the finished shirt. She'd completed it that afternoon, the collar finally cooperating. "Early Christmas," she said, suddenly shy as he unfolded it. Colt ran his fingers over the careful stitching, the precise buttonholes, the reinforced seams that would stand up to hard work. When he looked up, there was something vulnerable in his eyes. "It's perfect," he said simply. No one's made me anything since." "Try it on," Claire urged, not wanting him to retreat into grief. "Make sure it fits." He managed it with her help, favoring the injured shoulder. The blue did bring out his eyes, just as she'd hoped. The fit was good, broad enough through the shoulders, long enough in the arms. "How does it feel?" Instead of answering, he pulled her close with his good arm, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Feels like being cared for," he said against her hair. Forgot what that felt like. Claire wrapped her arms around his waist, careful of his shoulder. "Better get used to it," she said. "I'm not going anywhere." No. They stayed like that, holding each other in the lamp-lit kitchen while snow began to fall outside. Tomorrow would bring more work, it always did. The shoulder would heal slowly, and Colt would chafe at the restrictions. The ranch would demand attention. The weather would challenge them. And somewhere in town, people were probably still whispering about improprieties. But tonight, Claire helped Colt out of the new shirt, rewrapped his shoulder, and walked him to the spare room like it was the most natural thing in the world. She paused at the door, and he caught her hand. "Stay," he said quietly. "Just stay. I know it's not proper, but I'm tired of proper. Tired of being alone." She thought of her reputation, already in tatters. Thought of what Martha would say, what lines they'd be crossing. Then she thought of Colt's face that night in the barn, the loneliness he carried like a chronic ache. "All right," she said, and saw relief wash over his features. "Just sleeping. You're injured." "Just sleeping," he agreed. She changed into her nightgown behind the screen, achingly aware of his presence. When she slipped under the quilts, Sarah's quilts. On Sarah's side of the bed, Colt reached for her with his good arm, pulling her close. "Is this all right?" he asked, uncertain despite her presence. "Yes," she said, fitting herself against his uninjured side. "This is right." They lay together in the darkness, listening to the snow whisper against the windows. Claire felt the rise and fall of his breathing, the warmth of him, the strange rightness of being held after so many months of isolation. "I'll wait," he said suddenly, voice quiet in the darkness. "However long you need. I know we've crossed lines tonight, but I want you to know I'll wait until you're ready for more, until you're sure." Claire rose up on one elbow, able to see his face dimly in the snow light from the window. "Colt Wheeler," she said firmly. "I've been sure since the night you sat on that stump and waited for me to decide I could stay. Everything since has just been finding our way here." She leaned down and kissed him their first real kiss, soft and certain and worth all the months of waiting. When she pulled back, he was looking at her like she'd hung the stars. "Well then," he said, voice rough with emotion. "Well then," she agreed, settling back against him. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the ranch in pristine white. Inside, two people who'd thought themselves beyond hope held each other through the night, building something new from the ashes of old griefs. Tomorrow would come with all its challenges. But tonight, Claire fell asleep to the steady beat of Colt's heart, knowing she was exactly where she belonged. Home. The winter had settled deep by the time Colt's shoulder healed. Claire had grown comfortable in the rhythm they'd found working side by side during the day, sharing quiet evenings by the fire, sleeping chastely but closely in the bed that had once been his and Sarah's alone. They hadn't moved beyond kissing, both understanding without words that some things required more than just wanting. It was a Tuesday morning when Claire realized what had been nagging at her for days. She stood at the stove, stirring oatmeal, when the familiar motion made her stomach turn. She gripped the counter, waiting for it to pass, but a cold certainty settled over her. She'd felt this before, 2 years ago, before the fever that had taken everything. "You all right?" Martha asked, coming in with eggs from the coop. "Fine," Claire managed, though her mind was racing. It wasn't possible. The doctor had been clear the fever had damaged things beyond repair. She would never carry children. But her body whispered otherwise. The exhaustion she'd attributed to hard work, the queasiness she'd blamed on the change in weather, the tenderness she'd ignored because it couldn't mean what it seemed to mean. She moved through the morning in a daze, serving breakfast, cleaning dishes, all while her mind circled the impossible possibility. Colt noticed, of course, he did, catching her arm gently as she passed. "Something's wrong," he said, not a question. "I need to go to town," she said. "To see the doctor." Alarm flashed across his face. "Are you ill?" "I don't know. Maybe I need to know something." He wanted to come with her. She could see it in his eyes. But she shook her head. "I need to do this alone. Please." So she rode to town with Martha, who asked no questions but kept shooting her worried looks. Dr. Morrison was a younger man who'd arrived just that fall, replacing the aged Dr. Hendricks who'd finally retired. "Mrs. Wheeler?" he asked, and Claire didn't correct him. Easier than explaining. An hour later, she sat in his office, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white, as he delivered impossible news. "About 2 months along, I'd say. Everything seems normal, though given your history, we'll need to be watchful." "But I can't," Claire's voice broke. "The other doctor said the fever had made it impossible." Dr. Morrison frowned. "Fevers can cause damage." "Yes, but impossible is a strong word. The human body has a remarkable capacity to heal. Sometimes what seems irreparable simply needs time." Claire walked out of his office in a daze. Pregnant, after all the grief, all the acceptance of a barren future, she was carrying a child. Colt's child. Martha took one look at her face and guided her to the wagon without comment. They rode in silence until they were well out of town. "Whatever it is," Martha said finally, "we'll handle it, all of us." Claire touched her still flat stomach, wonder and terror warring in her chest. "I never thought I was told." "Doctors don't know everything," Martha said firmly. "They see what is, not always what might be." Back at the ranch, Claire found Colt in the barn, mending tack with his newly healed shoulder. He looked up when she entered, and she saw the worry in his eyes. "I need to tell you something," she said. He set down the leather immediately, giving her his full attention. Claire had rehearsed words on the ride home, But faced with him, they all fled. "I'm pregnant," she said baldly. The silence stretched between them. Colt's face going through a series of expressions too quick to read. Then he was on his feet, crossing to her in 3 strides. "You're sure?" The doctor confirmed it. "About 2 months." She touched her stomach again, still hardly believing. "I know we haven't that we were waiting, but that night in the barn. And after... Claire." He cupped her face in his hands, and she saw wonder in his eyes, mixed with something that might have been fear. "Are you all right? Is the baby?" "The doctor says everything looks normal. But Colt, I was told I couldn't have children. What if something goes wrong? What if..." He pulled her against him, holding her tight. "Then we'll face it together. Whatever comes." "I'm scared," she admitted against his chest. "So am I." His voice was rough. "Terrified, if I'm honest. But Claire, a baby. Our baby." She pulled back to look at him. "You're not angry about the impropriety, the scandal." "To hell with scandal." The vehemence in his voice surprised her. "Claire, I've spent 6 years thinking I'd never have this again, never have a family, a future beyond just getting through each day. And now you're here, and there's a child coming, and..." He stopped, struggling for words. "I know it's not what we planned, but very little in my life has gone according to plan." "Mine either," Claire said softly. He dropped to one knee right there in the barn, still holding her hands. "Marry me. Not because of the baby, not because of what people will say, because I love you. Because I've been falling in love with you since the day you stood on that platform, with nowhere to go and too much pride to admit it." Claire felt tears gathering. "Colt! I know I'm not what your family wanted for you. I know this ranch is hard living, and I'm set in my ways, and I come with ghosts. But I promise you this, I'll spend every day trying to deserve you. You and this child." "Yes," Claire said, pulling him to his feet. "Yes, of course yes. Though you should know you've had me since the night you gave me a blanket and a choice." He kissed her then, deep and sure, and Claire felt the last of her walls crumble. When they broke apart, both breathless, she saw tears on his cheeks. "We need to tell the others," she said. "Martha probably already knows." Colt said wryly, "Woman has a 6th sense." He was right. When they entered the kitchen hand in hand, Martha took one look at them and started laughing. "About time I was starting to think you two would dance around it forever." She hugged Claire tight. Then Colt, "A baby-o. We have so much to do. The small bedroom will need clearing out, and we'll need to lay in supplies." "Martha," Colt said, amused, "maybe let us get married first." "This Sunday," Martha declared. "I'll speak to Reverend Blake. Small ceremony, just family." And somehow, in Martha's capable hands, it happened just that way. 5 days later, Claire stood in the parlor of the ranch house wearing her best dress, the green wool she'd barely worn since arriving. Colt wore his new blue shirt, looking nervous and happy and younger than she'd ever seen him. Reverend Blake performed the ceremony with quiet dignity, pretending not to notice Claire's slightly thickening waist. Ben stood as witness for Colt. Jimmy held the rings, and Martha cried through the entire thing. "Do you, Claire Elizabeth Matheson, take this man?" The words washed over her, formal and binding. But what Claire really heard was the wind outside, the crackle of the fire, the breathing of the people who'd become her family. When she said, "I do," it came from the deepest part of her heart. They exchanged ring simple bands Colt had somehow procured from town, and then Reverend Blake was pronouncing them man and wife, and Colt was kissing her with a tenderness that made her knees weak. "Ladies and gentlemen," the Reverend said with a smile, "Mr. and Mrs. Colt Wheeler." Martha had prepared a feast roast beef, potatoes, green beans she'd preserved from the summer garden, and a cake that must have used a month's worth of sugar rations. They ate and laughed and toasted with apple cider, the warmth inside a stark contrast to the bitter cold beyond the windows. "To new beginnings," Ben said, raising his glass. "To family," Jimmy added, grinning. "To courage," Martha said, her eyes on Claire. "And to love that comes when we least expect it." That night, in the bed that was now truly theirs, Colt held Claire like she was made of spun glass. "I won't break," she told him, amused. "I know. He spread his hand over her stomach, where their child grew. "I lost them before, Sarah and the baby. I don't think I could survive it again." Claire covered his hand with hers. "We can't live in fear of what might happen. We can only live in the joy of what is." "When did you get so wise?" "Somewhere between learning to hold a gate in the wind and discovering I could reset a shoulder." She turned in his arms to face him. "We're not them, Colt. This is our story, not a repeat of the past." He kissed her then, and there were no more words, just two people finding their way to each other, building a future on the foundation of shared loss and unexpected grace. Later, as Claire lay in her husband's arms listening to the winter wind, she thought about the journey that had brought her here, from the platform at Cedar Ridge, certain her life was over, to this bed, this man, this impossible child growing beneath her heart. She'd lost the life she'd planned, but found one she'd never dared to dream of. Tomorrow would bring challenges it always did. There would be the pregnancy to navigate, the ranch work that never stopped, the gossips in town who would count months on their fingers. But tonight, Claire Wheeler placed her hand over her husband's where it rested on her stomach and felt complete, not healed. Some wounds never fully healed, but whole in a new way, part of something larger than herself. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "And I love you," Colt replied, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Both of you." Outside, snow began to fall again, blanketing the ranch in fresh white. But inside was warmth and love and the promise of new life. Inside was home. Thank you for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and share our thoughts together. If you enjoyed this tale from the American frontier, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 and hit the like button. And if you want to help more people discover these stories of love and courage in the Old West, please hit the hype button. Your support means the world to me and helps keep these stories alive. Until next time, partners.